Just let me know when you guys are good. Where's Steve? Oh. Okay.
I'm lurking in it. Who's judging Steve? Me. You? That's good. There you go.
Alright.
People dream of this panel. I'm glad we finally got the
I did have a dream last night.
Yeah, I was like,
Exactly like this.
I was like,
yeah.
Was I lurking in the corner?
That corner specifically.
the room or the dream?
Both?
Question mark?
Question mark, question mark?
alright. Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
Alright. All cards are bracketed for efficiency. Grammar part 1 is the framing. The current debate today makes us unaware of the actual struggles people go through every single day. When we talk about the living wage, the abstract, read long, useless narratives about suffering or pain to talk about how it violates freedom. We distance ourselves from the actual people who feel the suffering every day. The useless narratives lead us to even get excited about external suffering, because that suffering could be good to use as a card. Mitchell. Argumentation in the academic setting unfolds on purely assimilating pain with students practicing critical thinking, advocacy skills, and strictly hypothetical thought space. Sense attachment associated is highlighted during episodes alienation, which debaters turn as human suffering instead of focusing on the visceral negative responses to counts of human death and misery. Debaters overcome the zeal of competition, show a tendency to concentrate on the meanings of such evidence by hold the strength of their academic debate arguments. For example, news reports of mass starvation might tidy up the uniqueness of a disadvantage or bolster the inherency of nasty impacts. Reject util frameworks on face to exacerbate the problem, distance us more than anything else, because a debate because all oppression simply becomes a number games. To avoid this total detachment, I advocate a paradigm shift to account for the views of the oppressed through their narrative. Narratives allow for us to hear the actual voice of the oppressed through their suffering that they have felt, rather than to refer to that suffering in the form of hypothesized death counts. The narrative of the one you see lets us hear a story of specific people who have been oppressed because they were forced to work without a living wage. It's uniquely key to evoking empathy, letting us see the horrors that others have experienced prevalent. Narratives can transport us out of here and are now and put us in places very different from our own world. Narrative can be used to break down barriers to human understanding. It's difficult for early 21st century Americans to understand the horrors of the Holocaust, but through narrative, Elie Wiesel and others have taken us to Auschwitz and made us see the horrors of the death camps. Narrative creates a sense of identification between the audience and the narrator. To kill a mockingbird played a role in the civil rights movement because to help create a sense of identification between white and black Americans. Narrative can allow us to understand that I am like him or her. Listening to the actual voice of others is the only way to avoid oppression. When we speak on behalf of them or assume that we know what they want, we simply exacerbate the oppression. The best method is to use their actual specific words, alcoff, where one speaks from affects the meaning and truth of what one says, and thus one cannot transcend one's location. The creation of women in African American studies department was found on upon this very belief. Advocacy for the oppressed must be done principally by the oppressed. The speaker's location epistemically salient. A privileged person speaking on behalf of less privileged persons has resulted in increasing oppression. The group spoken for, the worker privileged authors who speak on behalf of the oppressed is coming under criticism of oppressed groups. As philosophers, we are authorized to develop theories that express the needs of others. We must ask ourselves whether this is an actual legitimate authority. When we don't allow the oppressed to speak for themselves, when we use the current model debate where we refer to them as individuals who experience suffering, or we open the door for massive oppression who are empirically proving the oppressed believe that Fidel Castro was actually doing the right things for them when obviously they were being oppressed by Fidel Castro Gurzhev. Automatic preference for the knowledge of the oppressed to that of the oppressor, or knowledge of the oppressed to that of the oppressor is dangerous. Self-evidence of the people is not without a terroristic potential. The idea is that the educational leader is responsible for the success of the project, while by the same token he has to be a lover and be loved. Opens the gate to totalitarianism as earthly heaven. These poles with violence as their secret connection are manifest in other poles in the system. This is personified by Fidel Castro and his own acceptance by his followers as guru. This means generic conceits say we should protect property rights or freedom violate. This assumes that the oppressed want these things protected in the first place and generalizes their oppression rather than referring to specific desires that they have. Half outweighs on accuracy. The narrative plan gives the oppressed people exactly what they desire. The part 2 is the role of the ballot. The role of the ballot is vote for the debater who poses the best post-fiat policy to minimize oppression consistent with a narrative of the oppressed. To clarify, the post-fiat policy is used solely to orient debaters and to induce discussion. Narratives achieve the best out around solvency. It's empirically proven that they evoke the most emotion out of everyone and lead individuals to activism against other forms of oppression. At the least, I outweigh on this round. The narrative definitely evokes more empathy than the current model debate does, and that drives us to action while helping us understand the struggles of oppressed individuals. Christoph and Wooden. Even when numbers are persuasive, they are not galvanizing. Psychological studies show statistics have a dulling effect, while individual stories move people to act in one experience. Research subjects were divided into groups, and each person was asked to donate $5 to alleviate hunger. One group was told the money would go to Rokia, a 7-year-old girl Molly. Another group was told the money would go to address malnutrition. The third group was told that donations would go to Rokia. By this time, her own hunger was presented. People were much more willing to donate to Rokia than 21 million hungry people. People contribute almost twice as much to save one child as 21 million people. Three implications. A, this role is uniquely key to minimizing pressure because we hear from specific voices. This allows us to understand other groups' pressure. That take a step closer to solving the root cause. B, to win a counter role about you need to win that model of debate not based on narrative is better for minimizing pressure. See, a counter narrative we positioned to win under my role if it was one way. Part 3 is the narrative. Here's the direct narrative of the prisoners through statement release. I don't defend any gendered language because it was used prison strikers by all males in all male prisons. Brothers, we have accomplished a major step in our struggle. We must continue. We have started. The only way to achieve our goal is to continue with our peaceful sit down. I ask each and every one of my brothers in the struggle to continue the fight on Monday morning when the doors open. Close them. Do not go to work. They cannot do anything to us that they haven't already done at one time or another. Brothers, don't give up now. Make them come to the table. Be strong. Do not make money for the state that they in turn use to keep us as slaves. Part 4 is the plan. The plan text is the Georgia state government will require the Georgia Department of Corrections to pay a living wage to all prisoners who want it in the Augusta, Baldwin, Hancock, Macon, Hayes, Smith, Rogers, and Telfair prisons. The prisoners themselves peacefully protested for a living wage and were brutally silenced. News 110. On Thursday morning, December 9, 2010, 1,000 Georgia prisoners were refused to work in peaceful protest for their human rights. Thousands of men from the prison-initiated strike pressed the Georgia Department of Corrections to stop treating them like animals and slaves and institute programs to address their basic human rights. They set forth the following demands: a living wage for work. Despite the prisoners' protests remained non-violent, the DOC violently attempted to force the men back to work, claiming that it was lawful to order prisoners to work without pay. In Augusta State Prison, 6 to 7 inmates were brutally ripped from their cells by team guards, resulting in broken ribs for one man beaten beyond recognition. I defend the entirety of the narrative, but the way I affirm the rest is through one of the particulars. A prison reform from the mouths of the prisoners being silenced intentionally. One is the speech act serves as the means for their voice to be heard when it has otherwise been silenced by you. Prisoners face basically insurmountable barriers to forming unions. Prison officials are permitted to ban petitions like those asking for improvements in prison conditions as long as prisons have other ways to voice their complaints. In one very important case, the Supreme Court upheld the prison's ban on union meetings and bulk mailings from the union to prisoners as long as there were other ways for prisoners to communicate. Given all these legal barriers, not to mention the practical barriers of prison life, it's all the more remarkable that Georgia prisoners were able to organize and carry out a collective protest of any kind, much less one that lasted almost a week. Hopefully their demands will draw attention to prison conditions. Part 5 is the underview. Reject T if the interp isn't disclosed at least 15 minutes prior to round. The applicant provide definitions for their interp, and there's linker impact turn go. A, I don't know what your interpretation topicality is part of that unless you tell me on the wiki. Excuse my strap, both my strap and topical discussion was any potential AC I read could violate a topical interpretation if the interp is so abused and that would outweigh the disadvantage of disclosing it. Be better for norm fitting because it forces people to take accountability for their T interps as opposed to reading bi-directional ones. Maximize the topical discussion because I can cohere your interpretations, but also allows me to clash prep for the T debate. Should I choose to deliberately violate C? I don't know what you'll think is the best topical interp as long as I can prove there's a definition supporting me and prove that there's ground. That's the reason why you should have absent explicit disclosure. The interpreters I was never given a chance to be a topical in the first place. 2, the advocates RBIs on T in theory was 2AR. I can't cover theory and substance since the 2N is twice long. I should be able to collapse theory. 3, emotion precedes reason. Ethics compels us to act. Fashing and chant. A narrative ethic differs from rationalistic ethic of principles and reason, insisting there's not enough to know the good in order to do it. We seldom feel ourselves compelled to act on the basis of logical conclusion. Ready?
Sorry. Yeah. So I don't have any prep against your narrative app because you didn't disclose it on the wiki. So how can I garner offense in this round if I don't have a narrative?
You could have cut a counter narrative.
Sure. How would I know to cut a counter narrative if you didn't disclose your top advocacy 15 minutes
Okay.
before the round?
First of all, my teammate has been reading this narrative the entirety of the topic.
Cool. You're not your teammate. Everyone on your team
Second,
reads different cases.
okay. First, my teammate has been reading the narrative the entirety of the topic.
So
the second reason,
just to clarify, the only way I can garner offense is if I read a counter narrative. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, you can make other
sure, that's what I want to know.
You can reconceptualize the standard and then talk
so
about.
how could I do? So what do you? Okay, so what's the standard?
So the role of the ballot is to vote for the debater who proposes the best post-fiat policy to minimize oppression consistent with the narrative of the oppressed.
Oh, cool. So if I agree with your narrative, I don't know, you didn't even offer because it's a narrative, but if I agree with this narrative, but I read like a counter plan or a different advocacy that solves better, is that sufficient to negate?
Well, it has to be consistent with my narrative.
No, if I agree with your narrative, but I read a counter plan that opposes your plan text that solves better, is that fine?
Well, I mean, I guess, but it has to be doing what like the people want because
Sure.
it has consistency with the narrative.
Yeah, no. Okay, so what is it that people want? Just from the narrative card, what do they say they want?
Well, the specific demands come out of News 1. The narrative, the Part 3 evidence.
I want to talk about the narrative, not the Newsom part, because he's speaking for them. I want to talk about
No.
Let's
That's a
talk the narrative
misunderstanding of Newsom. Okay, can I explain
Can we talk about
Newsom?
the narrative first because it comes first,
Well,
and that's my question?
I want to explain Newsom because Newsom talks about the specific demands.
I want to hear you explain the narrative.
Okay.
Explain to me what they want based on the narrative, in your opinion.
Okay, what they want comes out of Newsom. Can I explain Newsom?
Okay.
Okay, so the narrative is Part 3. That talks about when they were in the prisons, they refused to work. So they went on an intercom and they yelled. They made the speech. They said, we are not going to work. Then, when they were oppressed and after they were beaten for making the speech, they wrote out, the prisoners themselves wrote out a list of demands for all the things they want. So what on the list of demands that they wrote out a living wage for work. Newsom is not speaking for the individuals. He's taking the list of things that they wrote out.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. It's okay.
Let's talk about your role of the ballot. The role of the ballot is vote for the debater who proposes the best post-route policy consistent with the oppression based on the narrative, right?
To minimize oppression consistent with the narrative of the oppressed.
Okay, so basically what we just talked about. If I give you a different policy that's consistent with what you just said, that's sufficient to negate, right?
Sure.
Okay. Let's talk about these arguments in the underview. Did you ask me about like any T interps before the round or anything like that?
No, I didn't.
And you don't have a disclosure page, right, on the wiki?
I don't have a disclosure page, no.
Cool. Can you explain to me the C point?
the C point is that I don't know what you're gonna think is fair. So as long as I can like prove that there's some definition or
Do you
like
have
some.
that definition in the case, or are you?
Well, like, what do you mean? Like, I think it's fair. It talks about living wage,
You
so I
said
think it's tolerable.
You said there's a definition. Where's the definition?
I mean, okay,
I'm just using your words because I'm confused.
right, okay. Should I start from?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, the definition, the way I'm explaining the definition, right, is just that I can, let me rephrase the C point. The argument is just that I can assume that my app is fair, and I do think it's fair, right, and it's topical because it talks about living wage. So, like, if you think it's unfair, there's a chance that, or you think it's non-topical, there's a chance that that's true. But my argument is that absent explicit disclosure, I'm just going to assume mine is true, right?
Okay.
Like, I could adapt to your T-inter, but if you don't disclose it, I don't know to adapt to your T-inter.
That's fine. I understand. Your advocacy is that the Georgia state government should allow the prisons that you listed to give a living wage, right?
It's the plan text. Do you want me to read it?
No, but that's the correct understanding of it, right?
Yeah, my advocacy is the plan text.
Okay. How do you weigh narratives?
There's a couple ways we can do it. So I would say one, you could weigh like the accuracy of. So under the rolled about, you could weigh like the accuracy of the post-fiat policy to be consistent with the narrative, right? So I would say mine is accurate because it gives them what they want.
Okay.
I would say you could like
That's
weigh how oppressed people are, stuff like that.
37 seconds left.
Okay.
37?
37, yeah. The order is going to be NC 1 off AC. I can put it on the
Anything
doc.
particularly long?
The NC is pretty short, but the off case is a bit longer.
Longer than 3 minutes.
Probably somewhere around that. I haven't read the whole. I'm not sure exactly, but my guess is something like that. Do you want me to put it all in the document and give it to you?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah. Or actually, I think it's longer than that. It's longer than 3 minutes, probably.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I take it's 3 minutes for 2 sheets of 2
Oh,
separate
okay.
paper. That way I just need to know I can communicate those 2 guys.
Do you want me to put it? Yeah. Sorry. Just give me a second.
If you're gonna like skip over cards, could you just let me know
Yeah,
when you skip over?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just give me a sec. Alright.
Okay, so
One sec, actually. A sec.
What was your again?
It's NC, then a pretty long off, and then ABC.
Alright.
Sorry, give me 1 sec.
No
Okay.
problem.
Alright. Ready?
Is everybody ready?
Yeah.
I negate and defend the minarchist framework in which states can limit physical aggression and force conflict between citizens. First, non-minarchist governments ensure the notion of violence allows the state to interfere with person A's choice to benefit person B's, thus treat all the premises commensurable and advocacy. This is nonsense as values being developed by valid kinds of values, and there's no social line aggregation possible. This means we take out the AC because we can only look at the voice of one or two in this round. We can't look at everyone's views and marginalize all the other ones. This means you prefer my narrative, you buy the narrative stuff because I actually love for everyone to be accounted for. Second, all ethical theories, political theory, and minarchy allows citizens to form communities and projects which they support rather than coerce them. Anyone can pursue any project, we would always refer to maximum limitations as possible, realizing the real truth. This also turns back the narrative argument system. We should do whatever allows people to voice their own opinions, do whatever they want. My framework is the best software because it leads to less government intervention, whereas his leads to more government intervention. The standards consistent with minarchist states, a state which may only prevent physical aggression and enforce conflict between citizens. I contend that requiring a living wage exists with the minarchist state. First, living wage requirements exceed the minarchist and doesn't sort of enforce fraud. And second, it violates the employer and forces the employer to pay them a certain wage that actually being able to figure out the system on their own. Next is the off case. A is the links. Wage labor is the direct manifestation of capitalism. Living wage epitomizes this capital logic. Mitchell. The wage of capitalism from coercion. The wage places servants. They learn the method to coerce labor under capitalism. Workers do not own the means of production. So they must go who work for those who own and sell the only thing they own. They labor power to capitalists. Labor power. Slave gives rise to the appearance of the equal exchange. Equal exchange appears as the workers pay for the management produces his payroll only for ability to labor capitalists. And my ability to work enough values to reproduce ourselves. We are paid the minimum amount we need to reproduce ourselves. Wage labor subordinates the conscience to will such that our lives revolve around relying on capitalism. Mitchell 2. Under capitalism, we must work on those who owe the means of production, engage in the same form of labor when we receive a wage mirror needs what appears. Under capitalism, mirrors means to satisfy our needs and essentially actively like itself because of this schism between our labor and our conscious will. Labor is not used for our own invention. We give it away to the capitalists. We are regulated to one form of labor in order to exchange to meet our needs. This one-sidedness is precondition for meeting our needs unique to the capitalist mode of production. And B is the impact class, is the root cause of all forms of oppression. Koval explains. Class is essentially made in a category without rooted in even by biology. Historically, difference arises from classifying one side of a larger figure that includes state apparatus, conquest, and regulation, recreate race in the state, shape gender relations, that there will be no true resolution of races along with society stands nor can gender inequality legislate ways so long as class society within state class society generates generational ethnic impressions in the body where language take on the language that as well as primarily affecting configurations of class itself. The state is what steps forward to manage this conflict that the ruling class takes away without causing said parts of the state problems to do with this class contradiction. This is going to outweigh the arguments against how to minimize pressure with class focus is the root cause of all these issues. Which means that even if we see that there's some sort of pressure on the businesses, the way we can solve it is getting to the root cause, which is this class focus. C is the alternative. We must reject every instance of capitalism to overthrow the system. Herod explains the strategy for destroying capitalism, price grade militancy. The strategy is not a frontal attack into overthrow the system, but an inside attack at gutting, which simultaneously replaces it with something better. As something like capitalist relations are not part so simply rejecting this. We are democratic, not hierarchical, not qualified relations. Eventually overwhelm the capitalist relations support the matters existence. Our new social order must be within the old and new office until it is strong enough to dismantle and abolish capitalist relations. Thus, that means we must reject every instance of capitalism. We should reject the AC because capitalism leads to ways of further negative world, which we don't have to have these issues of wage labor. Also, my counter-advocacy text, which he says I have to have an advocacy text, is that the United States should abolish all correctional institutions on state, federal, and private levels and implement community-based rehabilitative solutions. Solves all the abolitionist scheme expanded in 07. In order to imagine rules that prisons new popular vocabulary, we have to replace the current language to articulate crime and punishment in such a way that we cannot think about society without crime expect a society in which all these criminals are in prison. One of the first challenges to be able to talk about the way any ways in which punishment is linked to poverty, race, and sexism, modes of predominance, such as we frame which acknowledges it takes the responsibility for social issues, cause crime, and leads to re-challenging billions of dollars in legal services and community-based education service, community forums, dispute resolution, radical mental health care, ability to community service for all adults and children, conglomeration for facilities, certain correctional facilities in a way that prisons never will. This means I solve best in two ways. The influence I saw best with the capitalist system, as far as I saw, I have also these principles. We protect capitalism, but it also means I saw better for the AC because I think they can count what these people want, and not just one narrative marginalized others. I think everyone's involved in prisons. The real root reason is the way that prison. It's not just the fact that they aren't paid enough. If you read the underlying text, there's a lot of other problems wrong with prisons. I have abolished prisons. That means like taking out all of them. We're taking out one, which marginalize all the others. Just abolition is key to challenge prison industrial economics and status quo. Solves better than the athlete. But the minor strict towards soft on crime can fix the problem. Sub 04. The media have fueled a race with fear, crime, prevention, lacking versus criminal aliens, finding the version of the knowledgeable system in relation to crime, partial data, and seeing imprisonment, manifestation, federal, state, political process, low prison, industrial complex, which is the carbon globalization, present growth, that's the agriculture, below third, identifying the existence of complex, economic political interest, the benefits from mass incarceration, debunkers, and the primary function of prison, scheme to safe force, recognize the prison, remote order of security for few, the cost of the genuine violence, and cause social justice for many. We have taken the first step in developing abolitionist view. We must challenge capitalist policies in order to, so this is going to be reached by my system is going to be solved better. As far as he's only solving for one minor issue, he's not taking the whole, or like I said earlier, this means I solve better. So even if you don't buy the capitalism's most important cause, which is linked to the Cope analysis, if you buy his arguments that we have to minimize the pressure through the prison system, I solve better through the abolitionist policy, which means I don't marginalize others and I'm always best for his system. Now go to the end. Starting as an overview to the framing issues. First, well, I'm not consistent with these arguments. He talks about usual scenarios. I'm talking about these issues I'm trying to actually solve better. The middle can't solve best because the last people actually do what they want. That's the two arguments in the framework to preempt all these arguments. Second, you can turn this narrative can't solve because the narrative marginalizes others. The issue with this is he wants people to do one narrative from just the Georgia State person, but there are tons of the prison, there are tons of other people who are feeling oppression. The narrative marginalizes one group and the other ones don't matter because we're only talking about one. This is the worst. Third, you can turn this as key for policy. Actually talk about actual policy attitudes just like mine. You also put counterclaim. Counterclaim is also going to solve better for these issues of framing because he says we have to actually have social movements. The best way to have a social movement is to have a radical change, which is something like the counterclaim, where it's just a minor change. Living wage, only actually garner, right? The arguments in the framing issues talk about how we need to have read narratives to like garner attention so people know what's going on. The best way to do this is to have a radical change movement, like abolishing prisons, where it's just a minor change. No one would actually know if there's a living wage or not. That's not a big thing we talk about in the news or whatnot. You prefer abolition because it actually solves the issues in the narrative. Now go on to the arguments in the role of the ballot. His first argument is how he minimizes pressure to the narrative. One cap out ways it's a Coval analysis because capitalism is the root cause of all these issues of class oppression. He doesn't explain to you how this oppression actually occurs. You also for my arguments, but also saying he can't actually solve everyone. That's he talks about how he marginalizes people. He can't actually solve oppression. He actually increases pressure because he's not solving for everyone. That other arguments have better for debate. One, there's no more ways better for big shit. Not about policy shit like stopping capitalism. This no makes sense. And C argument should be how you can weigh under, but that's not a reason why you prefer it. It's just how it operates under it. And also, as an overview to the section of the role of the ballot. This is the bottom of the document. First, turn voting affluence spread the message of the narrative. They'll just make one other kids brainstorm reasons why it's wrong, since everyone will be worried about hitting it. The people most think about running it. That effects will be promoting the conscious message of the narrative. Second, you can turn it again. The arguments running debate would have no sense of mechanisms, things, stability, just game time limits, and other rules. Make debate a bad way to do it. Make debate a bad way to search for ultimate truth. Some people don't base their opinions on arguments. They hear around. Kids have been running hobs for decades, so you don't see many debaters clamoring for an absolute monarchy. They create a ruse of solving the bad the pre-fiat index. Third, you can turn it again. Most people in the debate world have a negative association with critical arguments. You need the wrong association message of the narrative with its normal make people more or less this balance. It turns all the pre-fiat stuff into AC. What this means is that all of us arguments have the narratives. It's such a different system of how we do debate. How we do debates. Also, you can create words. These are terms. It means even if you set this role of value, you should vote for me because the way that he reads the narrative actually doesn't solve anything. It actually doesn't garner any change. It actually makes it worse. Even if you believe this about the narrative, doesn't make sense. Now, on to the argument about his advocacy on the prison stuff. If you actually come up with an underlying text, talk about that as a ton of things. Living wage is one of the many things. It means my counterclaim solves best because it leads to abolition of all prison systems, solves better for all these issues. It's not about the narrative. If you actually call for the narrative doesn't talk about living wage. Talk about how these people just hate the prison, how the prison system is horrible. That means abolition system calls best. Don't argue with the Newsom card. You look through the narrative. It's actually a direct quote when they're not being read through another person. Is the best way to look at what they actually said is a direct quote. They want prisons gone. I abolished them. Vote them.
Okay.
So I didn't read some of the stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So you read debates a game. Turn.
I read 2, 3, and 4.
Oh, okay. So no 1.
I did not read the first one.
Okay.
And obviously I didn't. There's a few cards that I didn't.
2, 3, 4, and
That
then
was it.
no
2,
5
3,
or 6.
And then I didn't read. I stopped at Sudbury.
Did you read AT time frame perm?
No, I did not read this. I didn't read Bleecker or I do this card. I think it's hard. Yeah, I didn't read those two cards. Sorry about that.
All right, no problem. Ready?
Yeah.
Why do you come first on the narrative debate?
So I say that you say that we look at the best advocacy that achieves the narrative wants. My argument is that my advocacy of abolishing prisons best achieves what they want. Right?
Okay, all right, that's fine. So what are all the turns to the app? First is that narrative, like...
It turns on the roll of ballot.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
I want to go through all the turns to the app. The first turn is that the narrative, like, excludes other people who are oppressed.
Oh, you're talking about at the top of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the first turn.
Well, the first argument was how the minarchist framework would solve best because we don't get involved in people's lives, so we allow them to do what they want, which leads to the least oppression.
Okay, what's the second
The second is the one that you're talking about, how narratives can't solve because it marginalizes other groups because you can only talk about a few different people in a 6-minute case, but there's a ton of other oppression going on in the world that we can't talk about, so it marginalizes those people.
Okay, that's the second one. The
Yeah.
third one is
The third one was just the reason why my counterplan is better. Again, those are the two arguments.
okay, and then the other ones are the three that are written out.
Yeah.
Okay. Most people in the debate world have negative associations with critical arguments. What's the warrant?
So that's the first argument.
Yeah.
The argument here is that empirically, when people read like narrative positions or very like different positions than normal topical apps, that people usually just brainstorm these by the wrong instead of embracing them. That's like empirically proven with how like debate functions. Because
But
it's easier just like
okay, why is this like so like okay? People don't like critical arguments. Why does that
the
mean we should
argument here
reject
is that if we care about your role about it and minimizing oppression, then we should vote you down so you don't read this again because it doesn't actually get it.
Wait.
It doesn't actually get.
If we care about my role of the ballot, vote me down.
Sure. So the argument here is that under your role, if we buy your role of the ballot and you read this case, people are just going to go around and brainstorm reasons why your argument's wrong. They don't like engaging in sort of like weird narrative positions. Why that's bad is because that means that no one's actually going to engage it. We're not actually going to learn about it. But we're actually going to think of it in a negative light.
But doesn't
because all we're
okay,
going to
okay,
hear is like
okay.
theory.
Well,
and stuff like
I
that.
understand, but doesn't that just mean my role of the ballot is like bad?
No.
It means I like can't discuss the narratives of the oppressed.
No, it's a reason why by reading this role of the ballot, you should right. It's bad. Like you're bad for the role of the ballot. I'll concede that your role of the ballot is correct. But by reading the narrative case, you should be voted down. Because
My role of the
bad.
okay, wait. My role of the ballot says I have to be consistent with the narrative of the oppressed. How can I still read the
Sure.
narrative but not read my role of the ballot? Or how
I mean,
be bad for my role of the
I
ballot?
mean, I don't speak to whether or not you can read your role of the ballot. I'm just conceding in this round, but like in other rounds, other people might say that you can't. My argument is purely how.
Why do we
the
care
way
about
that-
other rounds? Is there like a norm setting?
No.
argument?
I'm saying that your question doesn't make sense because what I did in this round doesn't affect how like it would work all the time. My argument is purely that because of the way that because of the narrative you read, what the argument that I explained earlier is the reason why you should be voted down because it doesn't actually like lead to minimizing oppression or spreading the message. It's actually bad for it. Is what my argument is.
Okay. So the arguments run in debate rounds have no substantive impact. What's the warrant in this argument?
Sure. So there's two warrants. It's the two sentences after. The first is that there are time limits and other rules, means we can't actually search for ultimate truth. We can't solve. That's kind of like the argument I made above. We can't read every narrative. The second part is example. Kids have been running Hobbes forever, but we don't like see people clamoring for absolute monarchy. Right? We haven't
Okay.
solved
All right.
absolute truth.
I'm good.
Okay.
Start prep. How do I turn the NC?
Turn the NC. You would show that a minarchist state should have a living wage.
How do you do that?
So my argument is that a minarchist framework is that states should only prevent physical aggression and enforce contracts. So you would have to show that a living wage is one of those two things.
Would property rights terms link?
If they link to physical aggression, or if you were citing like a contract that was made between citizens, then it would, but not just like generic abstract, like people should have property rights. It had to be more specific.
Okay. the advocacy of the neg, right? Because there's a counterplan text and then there's an alt to the K.
Well,
so do you have two advocacies?
No. The alt is that we should reject instances of capitalism, right? So I'm saying we should reject all instances. My counterplan is an example. We're rejecting a capitalist institution. The text specifically is the United States should abolish all corrections to some state, federal, private levels, community-based rebuttals institutions. Right? They're not mutually exclusive.
Okay.
The counterplan text is merely a way to compare post-grant advocacies with your framework, because you say we have to compare post-grant advocacies back to your narrative. I'm conceding your narrative, and I'm saying this is the best way to solve.
That's fine.
As an example of rejection practice.
All right, 25 seconds. Order is going to be AC top down, cap K, and then I'll like signpost.
Are you reading any?
Yeah.
Is it like just a few?
It could be like 3 or 4.
Okay, I can just look over your shoulder.
You sure? All right.
Yeah, it's not worth the time.
Okay, sweet.
DC top down chat?
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm right in front of the camera.
All right. Ready? He makes a couple turns. They're all bad. He says first, narratives marginalize others. He does no work on line by line. I'll get to that first. So, extend the Mitchell evidence says argumentation, the academic setting unfolds on a purely similar planes means that we're very detached. We don't talk about specific issues. This answers his argument. He says you marginalize others, but I would say that the worst oppression comes from when you don't listen to specific voices. Gursav evidence very good on this issue. Says the worst form of oppression came in Cuba, for example, when they thought Fidel Castro was doing good things for them. That was the worst form of oppression. He could see this evidence, which means that it's comparatively worse oppression when you don't listen to specific voices. It doesn't matter if you exclude some people's. We need to listen to voices. Then he says that the AF doesn't spread the message. I would say one, you definitely hear the narrative. That means when you leave it around, you're more empathetic. You could see solvency that says that we're empathetic when we hear specific voice and narratives. Means that the AF is comparatively better. Then he says turn doesn't spread a narrative. But I'd say one. Okay. Then the third turn is that it's like not. The third turn is an is-ought fallacy. He says that we should be talking about this right now, but I'll say one, it doesn't matter if critical arguments aren't liked, and then the second argument is that it's empirical claim without empirical more. It doesn't matter if we don't like critical arguments. Then go to the roll of the ballot. Concession is very damning. Extend the role of the ballot to vote for the debater proposes the best post-fiat policy to minimize pressure consistent with the narrative of the oppressed. He concedes this means the way you're going to be evaluating this round is very simple. Whoever's going to be consistent with the narrative, he makes a couple arguments about why he's going to be consistent with the narrative. He says that they want to abolish prisons, but call for the card after round. First, the narrative never says that they don't. They want to abolish prisons. It just says that they don't like the prisons. That means I outweigh on specificity of the narrative because they literally wrote down we want a living wage. He concedes that this is the way you weigh narratives, and at the point where he concedes a roll of the ballot for the round, this is the easiest place for you to vote. Is concede to weighing no new weighing for his narrative or his consistency with the narrative. The two and my arguments. I am definitely most specific. My plan text specifically says we give them a living wage, and they wrote down we want a living wage. Means I outweigh on a specificity. My post-fiat policy is more specific to the specific demands of what the individuals want. Then go to the right above the roll ballot. Extend Christoph one which says that I'm going to be solving because we're going to leave the round more empathetic outweighs all of his turns because you are going to be more specific and more understanding the struggle when you listen to the specific individuals and their voices. He's the argument he concedes that a counter narrative would be sufficient to win, or that to win a roll about you need to be winning. You're outweighing in terms of my roll about is very good on this issue. Then go to the cap K. First, actually start on the prisons. First, permit, abolish prisons, then after they're abolished, do the living wage. This is 100% net beneficial because they still get the living wage. What they want is the living wage, not the abolish prisons. Second, permit again, when you are, while you are abolishing prisons, give them living wage. The argument is that abolishing prisons is a long process. So during the process by which you, during the process when you are abolishing the prisons, you still give them the living wage. While it is happening, that means 100% net benefit because what they want, once again, what they want is the living wage, not to abolish prisons. Call for the cards up around. They never say, we want to abolish prisons. I weigh on specificity of the text. Then capitalism. First, cap inevitable. It's embedded in our daily lives. Calendarcos. Comparison of market exchange to conversation has the effect of naturalizing the market. Human society is unimaginable without language. Restricting or abolishing free trade markets threatens the very function of human societies. In the long run, human history, economic practices have been embedded in larger social relationships. Both external trade and local trade are relative to geographical distance. One being confined to goods cannot overcome it. Second, capitalism creates better environment. Taylor. Sewage treatment, electrification, unsanitary water, indoor air pollution are directly responsible for about 10 million deaths in a year. And third world, making poverty the number one environmental killer on the planet today. Capitalism can save more lives threatened by environmental pollution than all the environmental organizations combined. Then go to the arguments that he makes. First, Actually, back on the aft, the turn that says arguments have no substantive impact on people's thinking. One, this argument is just definitely not true. The solvency evidence is going to be very good on this. It says that it's a psychological study. It says when you hear a narrative, it is going to be impactful on your thinking. His argument is he's going to stand in the next speech say it's not impactful on your thinking. It's argument in debate round. My argument is that even if it's argument in debate round, it's different than the conventional arguments we have in debate round. Conventionally, we don't listen to specific voice of people. My argument is that always that means that answering all of his terms. Then go to the NC really quick. First, he says that government intervention is bad. But I would say one, government is the only way you can listen. Government is the only way that can we can listen to narrative of the people. My argument is that we have to oppose fiat policy. So the minarchy NC is not going to be consistent with the role about the minarchy NC goes away because it says no governments can have. My argument is we have to oppose fiat policy. That's a part of the role about. And if the role about is conceded, obviously that means the NC goes away.
Okay, I have 37 seconds.
Okay.
Can you read me the claim of your two terms, just like
Yeah.
what the
So.
first do, not the what? What's the first one?
The first one is abolish prisons. After they're abolished, give the prisoners the living wage.
Okay, what's the second?
Second perm is abolish prisons while you are abolishing prisons, give them a living wage. So abolishing prisons is
Okay.
like a process, right? You don't just
Okay,
like say
yeah,
abolish
yeah,
and then they're gone, right? So during that process, give them a living wage.
Okay. The order is going to be first on the NC, then the CAFK counterplan, and then the AC.
Okay.
So the same as last speech. Okay. Is everybody ready?
Yeah.
He's doing a bad job responding to the NC. The NC is faced with multiple arguments as to why this is the best way to solve for minimizing oppression and actually account for narratives. And so far as he's conceding this means this is the best framework to evaluate the ground. And so far as I'm going with the offense backward, this is going to be the easiest place to vote. It's consistent with his role of the ballot. It seems to have to look at narratives when people want, but I'm going to explain to you how we can actually do that in the real world. So go to the NC extent. And I defend the minarchy experiment of the first case of the non-monarch government to destroy the notion of value of state interfere with fierce and age source person, benefit person. These is the destruction of narratives means that we basically commensurate everyone. We don't have individual personalities and actually have stories. This marginalizes abuse that's going on. This is conceded in the last speech. Next, the second justification that all the theories floating in the theory of narratives, the last moral project. This is best because people actually pursue what they want, actually advance their narratives. This is best in this role about these people looking narratives and minimize oppression. I'm the only one who actually provides a government framework in which we can actually solve these problems in the real world. This is not what any arguments he makes in the debate space because A, my arguments are conceded, but B, these always have a larger impact based on magnitude and scope because they affect everyone. Because actually, then we should have a minimum framework that just affects everyone. Whereas his is just talking about prisons. I saw him after all the oppression. Remember, the role of the ballot is not specific to prisons, but his office speaks to prisons. But I talk about everyone because I saw best for minimizing oppression. Extend the contention. He said that I don't have an advocacy. My advocacy is the counter plan, which is abolish prisons. He doesn't concede. There's no reason why that doesn't link to the framework. That's conceded. But also, there's two arguments very clearly that he concedes. First, the living wage requirements exceeding the minimum demand. It doesn't start reinforcing fraud. He doesn't respond. And the second was that it violates the employer that it forces people to pay a certain amount of money. And they have not said this is the clearest place you can vote on the ground because they are conceded arguments. This is why I look best in the world value based on the NC, and he's conceding the offense back. Very clear place to vote first, but I'm also winning on the rest of the flow. So now go to the CAFK. You can start on the link section, which he concedes to. Extend the first argument that wage labor is direct manifestation of capitalism. Wage criminalizes this capitalist logic because it forces us into a system of wage labor. He's conceding the initial analysis. This is a system of coercion. It replaces the sort of state ownership, the methods of coercion, the idea of labor. This is conceded. You that he links. Then go to the impact analysis. Let's go to his first two terms first. First is the Colonizos card. This is an event in our life. One, this system is our fallacious thing. That is how it works right now. Doesn't mean and how it ought to work and how we should actually change our values. Second, we should try and start. As he's conceding the argument to Cavell that class is the root cause of oppression. These things are bad. We can't actually solve for all of it. There's no reason why we shouldn't try to solve it. Right? He says we should minimize oppression just because we can't minimize 100% oppression. There's no reason why we shouldn't try to minimize the most oppression. That argument is not made in the last speech. That takes it up. But third, you can turn this into the Cavell analysis. You actually cross-apply the impacts or to outweigh the Alonso's evidence. First, A points on magnitude because it affects everyone in class because it's literally all forms of oppression. All forms of oppression is the greatest impact. And B points on scope because it outweighs because it affects everyone as far as class. Affects everyone how we live this social most important. Then on the Taylor card, you can cross-apply the Cavell outweighs argument that capitalism being good or making sense because he's conceding the argument to the Cavell that class is the root cause of oppression. He's not doing any comparative analysis. Why this magnitude outweighs. He's always for my evidence because conceding in the last speech. He always outweighs, but also you cross-apply these arguments. There's no reason to extend the impact of Cavell, which the capitalism is the worst instance. Then you can go to the alternative. You can go. You can the analysis unless you reject every instance of capitalism. You can reject the AC because he's the system of capitalism. He's conceding the link analysis. I'm the one that's consistent with this with the counterpoint. Even if you don't buy the counterpoint solves best, as far as he's leaning to the most oppression in the round, that means you can vote here. This is going to be the second voting issue after the NCs. You can vote on the alternative to the hair analysis. I am rejecting capitalism. He is not. He's conceding that it is the biggest impact in the round to minimizing oppression, which links back to his role of the ballot. But also, I'm going to be winning on the counterplan plan debate as well. This is going to be the third layer of the debate you can vote on. So go to the counterplan text. Extend the counterplan text to the United States should abolish all correctional institutions solutions on state, federal, and private levels to implement community-based utility solutions. Let's extend my office, I'll get to the firms after extend the mixed bad management, the abolition of speakers, it actually leads to solving for all these issues, because when we don't have prisons, we actually get rid of the actual prisons as a whole and all the problems. You can cross with this is best, because if you actually call for the cards in the bottom, if you call for the card in the bottom of the it's the narrative, it talks about how they want things like living wage, they want decent health, they want end of cruel and unusual punishment, they want decent living conditions, nutritional meals, they want to get rid of the prison system. It's not just living wage. You can also cross with this is bad because he's marginalizing the other issues. If we just give him a living wage, then people are going to think that things have been solved because we gave him something, but it ignores the really big problems with the cruel and unusual punishment, the decent living conditions. That's what the narrative actually explains. That he wants the narrative, the brothers' argument is actually saying that they don't like prisons. The prisons are the problem. It's not that they don't get a living wage. That prisons are horrible in the way they treat him as well. That means that I solve best as he doesn't actually solve for treatment. There's no way that he solves things like cruel and unusual punishment and decent living conditions. I'm the only one that solves the activities of having rehabilitative systems. But also, if you want to buy into that living wage is specific, there are also arguments that they say they want things like vocational and self-improvement opportunities, and they want access to families. Those would be given in my world because I said we should have also have rehabilitative solutions. I'm consistent with the argument. I also solve best. Now onto the terms that he makes. First is an overview of the terms. You should reject both because they're mutually exclusive. The first one says we should do it. We should do it after. The second one says we should. The first one says we should do it after. The second one says we should do it while. You should reject these 8.1. Neighborhood strategies too, because if I undercover one, I'm just going to the other one because the increase in neighborhood neighbors are key. Neighbors keep best possible controls, equal access, and balance key. Or any sort of minimizing pressure disease. If we want to manage pressure, we have some sort of education. This we should reject one of them, but on these specific terms as well. The first is that we should do the time argument. First, you should reject the starting one. This destroys all time plan and critique ground because you can always just say that we should do it after. This means there's no way for me to actually put a compete in a post-grad advocacy. We should compare post-grad advocacy. This means the only way that I can actually operate in this role about is we reject this term. Second, no time frame possible. I feel that it happens to me, which means that I'm so prefer one as far as he's conceding arguments why the prison system. As far as he's conceding arguments why the prison system is really bad. I solve better because I solve right now, which he solves after design is always empirically better. This is always going to be better in both terms as well because he says if we do it wall, if we say we have living wage wall, we abolish prisons, there's always going to be a larger chance if we have living wage wall in the prison, but there's more prison time in the affirmative world. As far as he's conceding that prisons are really, really bad, is he making his arguments and he's conceding the argument through the mixed bad evidence. That means I'm also in with his firm. There's no net benefit to his firm because he's saying by the living wage is uniquely good. He's just saying that because I'm consistent with what they want. So now we'll do the AC really quick. On these arguments about the role of the ballot, he's conceding a couple of the arguments that I make as terms, which aren't actually going to, which you should not look at them. You can extend the second argument, which is that the argument from the Damerdji no system independent people's thinking, hey, let's just game uses emotions, but some people disprove it because things like timeless, we can't actually solve for it. Emotion don't make sense, but not in the Damerdji because we have timeless and we don't have this. We're also arguing the kids been running college forever. We don't have the absolute market. This argument goes on. Concedes we should not vote for him because he's actually not solving the impact. He's not actually causing this to be under his world value. He's voted down. The Damerdji sound very clearly. The minarchy system is conceded, and he's conceding reasons why it solves best for his minimizing pressure rule of value. That's the first voting issue. The second place that you can vote is on the K because he's conceding that class focus comes first and that weighs on magnitude and scope, and I'm going to reject capitalism. I'm also running on the post. You have absolute debate for the counter plan comparison because he's conceding that I solve best. He marginalizes the groups of stealing one issue where they talk about like 10 different issues that I solve best for, and also I solve specific issues as well. You can run any three of those layers, or let's turn to the role of the ballot.
25 seconds. The turn to the role value extended was the Hobbes one, right?
Yeah, that one. Okay. It's the second one.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Oh, not 30 minutes. Okay. Okay. Order's gonna be roll the ballot. Or no. Okay. Order's gonna be K, roll the ballot, and then I'll like signpost from there. Sorry? Yeah. Actually, I'll start with an overview. All right. Round breaks down really simply. He concedes that the worst type of repression comes from the Gurdjieff evidence that says that when you don't listen to specific voices, that's the worst type of repression. He concedes the Kalikanaz evidence. He says that we should at least try. So if he concedes cap inevitable, that means oppression in both worlds. So worst oppression comes out of the AF. Also, he's way behind on the weighing debate on the narrative and the roll ballot. So start on the roll ballot. Extend the rolled ballot says you vote for the beta proposed the best post-fiat policy to minimize pressure consistent with the narrative of the oppressed. He makes a lot of arguments that the prison's argument is going to be more consistent with the narrative. I would say this is just empirically not true. He concedes the specificity argument that I weigh in terms of specificity of consistent with the narrative. This is the most important weighing argument in the round. He says that they want to abolish prisons in the list of demands. They talk about a lot of other things, but they never explicitly say abolish prisons. They literally explicitly say when they wrote out their demands a living wage for work, which means that I weigh in terms of specificity of the narrative. That's game over issue. The roll of the ballot says that you vote for the debater who's proposes the best post-fiat policy to minimize pressure consistent with the narrative of the oppressed. It's a game over issue. He concedes the roll of the ballot. There's conceded weighing from the 1AR. remember, I am most consistent because I am more specific to the actual narrative. I agree that they would not like prisons, but they never say we want to abolish prisons. They explicitly say, when they write down their demands, a living wage for work. I weigh on specificity. The role of the ballot's conceded. It's a pretty easy decision for me there. But he extends a couple turns to the framework. So, go to the top of the framework. Extend the Mitchell evidence says that you make us apathetic when we talk about only abstract things. We talk about tiny values. We get distance from the conversation. His only turn is that we're not going to be listening to this. We're actually not going to be gaining any emotional education. We're not going to be any more emotional because debate just makes us unemotional. But the conceded Christoph evidence is very good on this issue. It says that it's a psychological study that says that the Rokia example that people wanted to donate to her when they heard her specific story of arguments that we might not be more emotional in every debate round and like the way debate rounds happen right now. My argument is that when I read a specific narrative, that's different than the current debate space. It's different than the way we debate right now, which means that I weigh in terms of the emotion argument. I'm way ahead there. We definitely evoke more emotion. I solve. Then go to the cap K. Or actually, extend Grzev. This is the worst oppression that has happened in history. Is when was the example of Fidel Castro when we thought that he was the person who was doing good things for us. The problem with this argument is the very good issue, the very good weighing argument, is that he concedes this is the worst form of oppression. So at the point where there's a cap is inevitable, he concedes the Kalinikos evidence. You prefer my evidence because there's more oppression in the. He concedes the worst form of oppression is when you speak for others. Grzev is very good on this issue. It says that that's what happened in Cuba. That's how that oppression happened because they let Fidel Castro speak for them. And they got to the point where they literally idealized them. Then he says the minarchist state comes first, but the role of the ballot's very good on this issue. It says that we have to have a post-fiat policy consistent with my argument is that the only way that we can have a policy consistent with the narrative is if you allow for the state to do it. So the minarchist stance, he definitely doesn't come first. The post-fiat policy is the plan text. The post-fiat policy has to talk about how the state is going to be doing it because they want a living wage from the state. So you cannot have a minarchist state. You have to have a powerful state that's able to give these wages because they are prisoners. That means the state has to be the one who's giving them a living wage. It means the minarchist stance, he doesn't come first. I'm way ahead. The role of the ballot's conceded. I only on specificity. Yeah.
Sim, do you want me to stop the recording?